And good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? So, yeah, firstly, welcome to the session. And Alice has suggested, mentioned, my name is Peter Crossand, and I'm the National Civil Engineering Director for SECA. I also wear a few other hats as well, which I won't go into, because this session isn't about me. It's about inclusive design. We've got three fantastic individuals who are going to make up this panel session. Before we launch into them, I'm sure you'll all have heard the horror stories, including both societal and engineering aspects within your own sphere of expertise, where sort of exclusive design has been a notable feature. You know the examples. Doorways too narrow, staircases too steep, sudden changes of direction at height. Balconies with low guardrails, which is completely not safe. Access hatches which can't even be accessed, and the last one, the light fitting that requires the local fire brigade to come out and change the bulb, and that's one for the architects. And I could go on, but it's with great anticipation really to hear how inclusive design is approached, and hopefully we will hear some key messages that we can all take away back to our own specific areas of expertise. I'll let the speakers introduce themselves at the start of the presentation. But the way it's going to work is I'm going to ask Matteo Zalio to go first, and we'll have a short Q&A session after that. After Matteo, we'll then hear from Jenny McLaughlin and Nigel Stroud, both from Heathrow, again circa 10 minutes each, and we'll take questions relating to their presentations. And if we have time, we can bring Matteo back. As suggested, please use the Q&A facility on the call, and we'll try and collate and ask the appropriate person. So if I could just then introduce Matteo Zalio, Senior UX, that's User Experience Researcher from the University of Cambridge. Matteo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thanks everybody for joining the session. Yes, you said correctly. I'm a Senior User Experience Researcher at the University of Cambridge, and I'm working also with MotionSpot, which is a leading British company that does inclusive design. So today I will share with you a couple of examples, but also a few interesting research findings that we came across recently at Cambridge. So let me share a couple of slides with you. I hope you can see them. And as you know, I just introduced myself. I have a background in architecture, and I've been very much interested on inclusive design, and in particular, how inclusive design impacts how we experience the use of objects, services, environments, but also relationships. So we all know that there are different approaches around the world. Some people call inclusive design, especially in the British scenario. Other people call it design for all in Europe. Other people call it universal design in the United States, but Canada, Australia, and other parts of the world. And what we did at MotionSpot was to analyze a number of standards, acts, and laws that regulate accessibility and foster inclusion in the built environment. And we found that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of documents just in the European setting, including Britain, of course, that regulate how we have to build accessibly and more inclusively for everybody. And I'm sure you're pretty much aware of this. However, we still witness inequalities in the society, and we still work in offices and live in houses that we might consider hardly to go beyond the accessibility standards, so targeting inclusive design. They might be slightly accessible, but many times I think we still believe that are not really fully accessible and not even inclusive. So something that came out during discussions with a lot of practitioners and experts that I see also here today in this amazing talk and this seminar is that we often stigmatize who designs the buildings, who build the buildings, and who creates the spaces where we live. However, I think there is something more about this. So yes, we can say different people have different impact on what we build. But according to a recent study we developed at Cambridge, only 10%, around 10% of clients are well informed about inclusive design and what actually means. So when people know about what inclusive design means, what accessibility means, then they might inquire for inclusive projects going beyond accessibility. So this tiny portion of people, 10% of clients that know about inclusive design, are going to ask more likely for an inclusive design project. However, how about the almost 90% of people who are not really aware of what inclusive design means? Is it about building accessibly, or is it about targeting neurodiversity and sensory and cognitive accessibility? Another interesting data that we were able to extract from our analysis is that a lot of clients, around 70+%, fail to perceive the value of inclusive design. What that means that, as I said before, some people think that inclusive design might mean only to build accessible environments, meeting the baseline of the regulations. However, we all know, or actually we think, we should know that inclusive design means much more. So something that we believe is really important from the research we have done at Cambridge, but also from the practice that companies such as MotionSpot do, is that, as you might know, education awareness among the building sector, but also among clients, is really important. So actually, there is a role of educators in everybody of us to really foster the understanding and the awareness among stakeholders about what inclusive design means. And there is much more of that. When we make sure that the people we have in front of us understand our language, understand what we are talking about, we can also create a market demand and therefore allow our stakeholders to demand more and inquire more for an inclusive design project. And third, once we have created the market demand, we have the tools, we have the knowledge to answer the demand, because all these conversations are bringing the awareness at a higher level. And I would just finish with a couple of keywords that I think are worth to mention. I call this as a call to action. So I think it's really a lot about people. We have to, of course, develop the right skills. And as an academic, a researcher, and somehow also an educator, I think it's literally fundamental to develop the right skills since the start of the school, preschool, elementary school, high school, colleges. And to develop the right skills, it's not just about learning once in the life, but really keep ourselves up to date, keep ourselves involved into standards developments, like many of you, I'm sure, do. Keep yourself up to date by reading articles, joining groups, and basically have discussion with people, because this is the way we can understand people who speak different languages, people with different gender, different age, different cultural background, different needs and different abilities. Create the right mix. As we know, working together with people from different countries, people with different background, and also people with different needs, help us to be more inclusive. And therefore, if we have in our team people with a different set of skills, along with different language maybe that they speak and different culture, it might really help us to design really inclusively. And fourth, well, nothing simpler than remember all of these and repeat and increase our awareness of inclusive design, but most importantly, increase the awareness of inclusive design with the stakeholders we normally speak on a daily basis. So I think that between data from research and data from the practice, raising the bar from accessibility to inclusion, equity, and diversity, it's something that we are here to target this goal. We are here to learn about how to raise this bar and really become inclusive designers, inclusive architects, inclusive who we are. So I think that for now, these are some data that we share with you, but I'm really happy if you want to reach out to us and ask more about what we think and how we think inclusive design and inclusive spaces and buildings should be in the near future. Please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and thanks a lot for your attention.
Matteo, thanks very much for that really insightful presentation, and hopefully it's got everybody thinking actually, you know, what they could be doing going forward. Again, I'm just looking at the Q&A. Nothing's come in at the minute, but similar to Alistair, I've got a few up my sleeve. It's a pity that Fergus has had to disappear, because I think there's potentially a good conversation there to be had, certainly with government, and you certainly, in terms of the research that you have now, possibly could be and should be fed back into the government to try and influence their thinking, particularly around. I'm really interested in the education and awareness at a younger age level, because I think you're right in terms of the stigmatization of the industry. You know, we create this image, but actually there is a potential to actually try and drill down at a very young age. I mean, when you say young, what age would you have in mind? Are you talking primary school, you know, junior school, secondary school?
Well, Peter, that's a very interesting question. And I would answer by saying something like this. We think about inclusive design from the perspective of designers, architects, and builders. So building things that are inclusive. But it's hard, I think, to get an understanding of inclusive design when you are, let's say, towards the end of your college studies or your academic studies. I think it's important to understand the concept of diversity and equity, but also of speaking an inclusive language since you are a little kid. So I think the education should start at a family level. When you are a toddler, when you are very young, before you approach the preschool or even the elementary school, it's exactly that moment where you learn about using inclusive words, about understanding that there are diverse people around you. And therefore, if you get this understanding since the young age, I think then you will be more likely to embrace this concept in the future in your studies.
Great stuff. Right, thanks, thanks, Matteo. I do have one more, which is probably more on a practical level. Just in terms of the application of inclusive design, and I think maybe perhaps Jenny and Nigel will touch on this further, but from your experience, I wondered, are there any sectors within the infrastructure sector that are more likely or more difficult to apply the principles of inclusive design? You know, is there anyone that strikes you as being almost impossible to do, or can you apply the principles regardless?
Well, I think maybe I'm a visionary, but I think we can apply the principles regardless, and I'll tell you why. It's the answer is similar to the question many people ask me about: what's the value of doing research before developing a product? Why do we have to spend time and money to do research? Well, the answer is not really simple, but I make it simple. If you don't research ahead of developing your product, you might waste a lot of money and a lot of time when you launch a product that doesn't really answer the demand of your customers. Similarly, if you do inclusive design and if you know about designing inclusively since the start, you actually can answer the demand of the customers and broaden the use of the building, the infrastructure, the transportation system, and whatever you're designing to the very not mainstream population, but the whole set of people, the whole audience of people that might use the product or the service or the environment you're going to design.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Thank you very much, Matteo. And with that, I'll say thank you, and we will move on. But again, and thank you kindly for your offer of answering any questions. I think your details will be on the website. And hopefully you do get swamped with questions, because it will show that there's that level of interest. Okay, thanks, Matteo.
Thank you.
Now, moving on very swiftly, we have either, I'm not quite sure which order we're going in, it's either Nigel Stroud or Jenny McLaughlin from Heathrow. Is it Jenny?
It's me. It is me up next.
Excellent. Jenny, I'll let you do your introduction. So you've got 10 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm Jenny McLaughlin. I'm a project manager at Heathrow Airport. And about a year ago, I, well, like most of us, got stuck in my own house and had far too much time to think. I'm hoping I am sharing this in screen mode.
You are. Yeah.
Thank you. Had too much time to think, which anybody who works with me knows is a really bad thing, giving me too much time to think. And I started to think about two things, and actually Fergus and Matteo have both set me up nicely to talk through my presentation by already talking about some of the elements that I want to go through. So one of the things that I started to think about is actually the idea of inclusive design, which has become very important to me for a number of personal reasons, and the principles of CDM 2015. So for those of you who aren't aware, CDM 2015 is the regulations that require us as clients to ensure that anything that we design to be built in terms of infrastructure is designed in a way that is safe. And what I started to think about was actually, when you look at CDM regulations and how we apply them as clients, we aren't doing a full job. What we are doing is applying them in the same way as we would apply our health and safety requirements, but we're not looking at the demographics that we currently hire within our construction industry or that we would like to hire in the future. So what we are typically doing is looking at what we think is the demographics within our industry and designing for them. Now, that is assuming in many cases that the demographics that we hire are white, male, fully abled, no sensory cognitive impairments. And that isn't the case in a number of perspectives. And it's certainly not the case in what we want to hire in the future. And what do I mean by that? So if you look at the statistics, and a great example or a book I would recommend reading is Invisible Women by Caroline Crier-Deprez. Now, things within the safety industry, we already know that the data we have and that we design on is actually very male focused. So things like driving a car today, the crash test dummies are based on a male 5'8" and over dummy with a certain build that will sit a certain distance away from the steering wheel. And actually, in true life, you are 47% more likely to be injured in a car accident if you're female, and you're 17% more likely to die. And that's because the data we currently use within our safety industry is very male focused. It's also very white focused. So things like face-fitting masks are based on a Caucasian face. And you only need to look at any of the images that were put out from the NHS during COVID to notice that a lot of the PPE that doctors wear, the same thing is true, that it's based on a very generic assumed average person. And an average person, as we know, doesn't exist. And this isn't just known about now, this has been known about for a very long time. If you look back at circumstances, so the American Air Force, when they were testing their pilots in their new fighters, they measured all the pilots and they found the average of all the pilots, and they designed the cockpit around that average, and the planes kept crashing and some pilots died. And they couldn't work out why this was happening. And then they took that average measurements and they re-measured everybody, and they found it fitted absolutely none of their pilots. None of their pilots could operate that cockpit because it was based on an average that didn't exist. And this is why I've been looking at a project within Heathrow to marry up these two things, inclusive design, as Matteo has been talking about, and the CDM principles. And why did I mention Fergus? Well, Fergus already talked about the fact that we, one, have an aging population within our construction industry. Most of them are over 50, and we all know that we're only temporarily abled. At some point in our lives, we will gain a disability. Now, whether that's needing to wear glasses, need to wear a hearing aid, having arthritis or back issues, and we design as if all of our construction sites can be built by 18 to 20-year-old fully fit males. So again, there is so much within here that we need to discover. And what it will do is not only make the construction into safety in an equitable way for everybody we want to partake in it, but it will also mean that it will embed an absolute sense of belonging. It will change the construction industry's image. It will mean that the mental health and the performance and the quality and all of these things will improve, not just the safety. And it's such a big thing for us to move towards. So some of you will be still sitting there scratching your heads going, on how on earth do we do this? What is it within the industry that we can change? Because we are very set in our ways, and we are very set in our ways, that is very true. But you look at the industry leaders out there in other sectors, and they are already doing this, and they are already winning and proving that you can. And one of the examples that I talk about is the Nike Go Fly Ease. Now, 18 months ago, a year ago, you'd have said, well, why do we want to create a trainer? Why would Nike want to create a trainer for disabled people? Disabled people aren't going to use trainers, so they can't run. But actually the inverse was true. disabled people weren't using trainers because they couldn't actually access them. They couldn't wear the trainers. And now that the trainers have been made easier to put on, it's absolutely built the industry from Nike in terms of actually who are trainers for, who is athletics for, all of this, and changing it, flipping the narrative on its head. And this can be true in any of the sectors that we have. But also what is true is that people who don't have disabilities have said, these are what I need. Pregnant women who can't put their trainers on but still want to run. People with other difficulties in terms of bending, etc. So actually it benefits everybody by making these small changes and designing for those who we don't think fit into the system. We actually improve the system for everybody. Another example is the European Space Agency. Now, they are specifically targeting disabled people to go into space, and they're saying, how do we design differently in order to allow this? Because what they see is that diversity is not a burden. Actually, the technology is the only thing stopping people from being able to go into space, and we need to design appropriately because we want this diverse range of thought, as said in the video straight at the beginning. And then looking at things like so there are many industry and small companies out there that are building up now, and I think we could do the same within the construction industry, is looking at ergonomics in the terms of this standard male and actually designing for the what we believe is the outliers, but actually are the demographics that we need to design for. So Green Heron is just one example out there at the moment who have looked at the demographics of the female hand and looked at garden tools and what do you need to design differently so that females are more and able to access those tools. And what they found is not only are they being sold out for women, but actually men are saying these tools are easier to use. Why don't we design tools like this in the future? And again, this can all be built into how we make sure the construction industry is fit for the diversity we want to be able to employ. So in terms of looking then, what do we do next about this? And this is what Heathrow is doing currently. And areas that I'm working on with a number of parties externally to make sure that we can build across the client areas. So things that we're looking at is accessibility bootcamp upskilling. So as Matteo said, how do we ensure that all clients, it is utterly, how can we create an industry that is better for those that we want to employ if only 10% of clients understand that inclusivity, designing for the demographics that we want and the diversity that we want is important. So upskilling is very important. So we've created an accessibility bootcamp at Heathrow, and we're hoping to champion this and being able to get other industries, whether that's the CITB or SAAC, to uptake this training tool and be able to deliver it to all clients and all of the industry. We're starting at Heathrow to record the accessibility of our assets. So the engineers are going out and not only looking at the how old is the asset, is it maintainable, etc., but can I maintain it? What is it about this asset that makes it difficult? So an example there is our CCTV cameras. So our CCTV cameras all across Heathrow, we found that by doing the audit, that actually a percentage of our assets, our CCTV cameras, cannot be maintained by a percentage of our current workforce, because you have to be a certain height. So given where it is, you need to be a certain height, and you need to be able to hold your hands above your head for a prolonged period of time. So again, it's about understanding and starting to record these hotspots and these learnings from the assets that we currently have, and going out to our supply chain and our manufacturers saying, you need to do better, you need to innovate, because these are the people we want to be able to employ, and we can't currently employ them because they can't maintain the assets if you design them currently. It's improving the understanding of inclusive health and safety. I think there is a big link between the mental well health of our current workforce and the ability for them to be able to speak up about what they don't feel is safe. Because what they currently feel in the industry that we have right now is if they're saying they don't feel safe, they're saying they don't belong. And that isn't true. What they should be saying is, you haven't designed this for me. So an example I give here is that when I was a project manager on a site a year ago, and we were laying the base of our basement, and I needed at one point proportion to be able to walk across some rebar. Now, rebar is not designed to be walked across if you have a size 5 foot, and I felt in my gut, very unsafe doing it. But I did it because I wanted to come across like a competent client project manager, able to do my job. So I didn't put my hand up and say, I don't feel safe doing this. And as you can see, I'm not backward in being able to speak. but I didn't feel safe within that environment to put my hand up and say, I can't do that. It's not designed for me. And what I want to create at Heathrow is an industry where everybody has the ability to put their hand up and say, I don't feel safe right now, and not feel that that's an attack on their identity. Actually, they are doing their best to be able to make us as clients be better designing those in the future by understanding what the risks are currently right now. And all of this is obviously in the same way as we do all projects. It's part of our lessons learned. It should become accessibility. Some of the reasons, as Matteo has stated, some of the reasons that products don't land, we don't deliver those benefits, is because we've not understood the inclusivity that we need to. We've not done that research, and we need to build that back into our lessons learned. We need to look, when we're looking at root causes of health and safety incidents, have we understood the demographics that we're asking? It's not just as simple as, well, giving a toolbox talk. It's actually understanding, how do these people need to be able to process this information, and am I providing it in a means that they are able to understand? If we look at our workforce, and Fergus mentioned earlier, the number of non-formal qualifications. Well, is it because these people have undiagnosed neurodiverse conditions? Are they dyslexic? Do they have ADHD or autism? Is there a reason why they haven't gained the qualification? Is it because of our education system and our way that we do training that actually prevents them and creates the barrier from them having extra qualifications? And is it also a barrier for them being as safe as the next person on site, because we don't provide the information in a way that they can process and be able to be as safe as the next person? And all of this needs to be embedded in every single outlet of what we do. It needs to be within our digital tools, and Nigel will touch on this in his next presentation, so I won't steal his thunder. It needs to be within our procurement. As I said, it's going out to the industries. It's going out not only to our designers, to our contractors, but also to the manufacturers, and saying, how can we do this differently? How can we create an asset and a way to install that asset that is much more equitably safe? And all of your governance. Now, I've no idea what time I am. I think I need to shut up now. But if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That's just about bang on time. I think what we said was we'll move very quickly to Nigel, and then we'll take questions in the time remaining. So thank you for that great insight from a client perspective. I've certainly got a few questions, but before we launch into them, Nigel, I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself and have the remaining 10 minutes for presentation. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me, and I'm just going to push this into presenter mode. So yeah, good morning. My name is Nigel Stroud. I'm our digital asset information lead at Heathrow. I've been working at Heathrow for 20 years, and I'm really excited because I'm working on an implementation plan on how we move our asset information through its life cycle, and it's a big change piece of work that that we're doing currently. Now, we've been introducing processes digitally at Heathrow for many years, and quite often, I don't think that's better. Can everybody see that in presenter mode now?
Yeah, that's fine, Nigel. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, we've been moving our data through our asset life cycle for many years at Heathrow, and we often ask ourselves, well, we've got a process in place of how we deliver our information and how we utilize it. What's wrong with what we've got? And what I find is that information tends to be targeted at intended recipients to complete a specific task. We don't include the wider Heathrow stakeholders. And if I look at the landscape that we have at Heathrow, we do have information silos, and a lot of our processes are labour intensive, and they're manual, disconnected, data's not connected together. And we find that we spend a lot of money resurveying and reworking a lot of information that potentially we all already have, and we tend to, we can end up buying information that we already got. And from our colleagues, this puts a lack of trust in the information that we have for people to be able to do things with that information. So this is the kind of the challenge statement that I've been working on, and for me it's really exciting because It means that we're producing now a new digital state, and really this is going to transform how our asset information is, one, procured, is delivered through our supply chain, and consumed through our stakeholders. And what we'll be doing is creating really a secure, collaborative environment that's inclusive for everyone across the asset life cycle. And we will ensure that we only procure what we want, that will give benefit to us and our stakeholders. And something that's really important for me is that we will make sure that the information that we're interacting with is next generation ready. We're used to interacting with spreadsheets and documents. And for me, there's a younger generation coming into the workforce now that interact with information in a completely different way. If I take my son, he's got a controller fixed to his hands constantly. So he's interacting with information a different way. And we need to think differently on how we present our information. And we really want to eliminate file-based transactional exchange, have information that is easily accessible. And I think something that is really important is that if we create this foundation, we will create a foundation for future innovation. Getting the foundations right means that we can then start to develop lots of future initiatives that actually build on trusted data. And we can then automate a number of these processes, so we're not reliant on people moving data from one silo to another, so that our delivery is automated, so that as a client we can just focus our time on assuring the completeness and the quality of that data and making sure that we're getting benefit and everyone across the organization is getting value. Now, we're not starting from scratch. At Heathrow, we have got quite a mature digital landscape. We have what we call our common data environment. And something that is really key around that environment is the way that we classify our information. And Jenny picked up there around asset information and how we identify our assets. And we've used this throughout the organization. So whether you've got a financial lens, whether you've got an engineering and a maintainer lens on our asset information, or you're a designer who is designing our information, we have a single common language that is describing what that asset looks like. And we are embedding those requirements into our early design so that we can ensure that our designers are creating exactly what's needed by our stakeholders. And we started to exploit this. So our airfield colleagues are using mobile devices to go out and locate our lights to actually see where lights are failing. And they're using that same information that our designers have created, and they are able to identify where there is an issue and log a fault onto the system so that that can be mitigated. So we're starting to join this data, and as I say, it's really important that we've got this foundation right, and the common language that we've created really creates that foundation. Moving into a bit of a segue, what Jenny was talking around safety in design, and I think this is really important. So building on this new way of working with our digital data, we've realized within design that we don't really have a consistent way of how we capture our safety risk. So we push a lot of onus onto our designers, who have got lots of methods. They will use spreadsheets and various means to identify where there is an issue in design and what mitigation needs to be designed in through the process. But what we don't do, we don't collaborate that information with a wider set of stakeholders. And across the organization, it's really difficult to get some visibility of where we've got those high safety risk issues. And the knowledge is often lost, and we don't share this across our organisation. And when we move that design through the project process and we go into construction, and then we move those assets into operational use, our operational colleagues do not have that clear sight of that residual safety risk that is still remaining. How does that maintenance engineer maintain a particular plant room that's got a low ceiling height? So we lose some of that information through the design and construction process. So this is our kind of current challenge, although it's, you know, a really important part of the design. So what we've been working on, and this is really on the back of our transformation piece with our asset information, we've been running a trial working with the health and safety executive, Manchester University, our own health and safety team. An initiative is called Safety Base. And the idea of the Safety Base initiative is that we can identify our safety risks really early on in design and attach that information locationally to the developing design information. So a lot of our design now is being done with really intelligent three-dimensional models, and where a risk gets identified, we can attach that to the design data. So instantly our stakeholders can start to see where that issue is being affected. And the clever thing behind this initiative is that we're trying to systemize the way that that safety risk is categorized and also is mitigated, so we can automate some of the mitigations. So there are patterns in how safety issues arise, and using those patterns we're able to mitigate with a number of choices. And this really helps to speed up the way that safety is dealt with through design. And for me, the really important thing with recording this information through our design process is that we can keep that information as we then go into operations. So our operational colleagues and a much wider set of stakeholders across the organisation can actually start to view some of those safety hotspots across Heathrow and delve into some of the mitigations that have been put in place. So that's really a quick insight into what we're doing. So I think Jenny and myself would be happy to take some questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Nigel. Yeah, again, a great insight into the operations, and certainly those who haven't come across Safety Base, I know it is being trialled at the minute, but I think the industry is really looking forward to the outputs and outcomes of that, because it's a fantastic project.
Absolutely.
It's what I'm aware of, and if anybody else you know, wants to know about it, the information is on the HSE website as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've got a couple of questions. We've got a few minutes. We've got 10 minutes, and we can also include Matteo, if Matteo wants to come back in as well. So, Jenny, if you're there too. My first question, I haven't. Sorry, there is one on the Q&A, which I'll just wait for Matteo to come back in because it's aimed at him. But before he does, I think really, Jenny, from your own perspective, and obviously from a client perspective, what top 3 actions would you suggest for your supply chain to try and embrace the main principles of inclusive design? Are there any real key changes that the organisations have to go and make really to make this to get the first step of the ladder?
So I think the first one is to respectfully hear their colleagues and the people they employ right now, because I don't believe that currently within the industry we have a good understanding of the risk that people are currently taking and why that risk exists, because they feel different to the next person, or they feel different to how they should be to be a construction worker. So they really need to be able to listen, and to, in the same way as Fer, you know, suggests, to hold account those people who are currently making individuals feel that they aren't able to raise things that are currently borrowing them. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is to start to innovate. Design has the ability to either create a barrier or include someone. And we have got used to assuming that the exclusion exists because of a reason, but none of us can remember what the reason is. It's just a habit that we formed. So I think it's really about looking at other industries, innovating, taking everything that is possible and really looking at what can we do completely differently, and going and trying it. And sometimes we might fail, and sometimes we might do the next innovation and shift change for the construction industry. And I think the third thing is to hold clients to account. If there's only 10% of us who even know what we're talking about, that's a scary place to start. And we really need to start to hold clients account. Under the CDM 2015 regulations, it's very close to my heart. We have to start as clients being responsible for the workforce that we're putting out there to do our projects. And we need to be held to account in order to make sure every single one of them, every human being in our projects is equitably safe.
Well, thanks, and I really appreciate that call to arms for clients, because that really is, as you quite rightly say. I think the one phrase within CDM 2015 which was used more than any of its predecessors was the word client, and the real focus to try and get clients to actually do things right. And it is just with that focus on CDM to both either yourself or Nigel, before I come to Matteo's question. Is there anything, CDM as it stands alone, when you look at it and the guidance within L153, it's all there, isn't it? If we actually did what we were asked to do, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, really, would we?
It is exactly that. That was the penny drop moment 18 months ago to me, was if we actually applied CDM 2015 in the essence that it was created, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But we don't, because we have got trapped into a habit of designing the way we've always designed, using the averages and the standards we've always used. And what the digital space, I will let Nigel speak, and what the digital space gives us is that opportunity to start collaborating and collecting that data and sharing it across clients. There are great initiatives out there around data collection and data share amongst clients, and we need to get better at it, because as my boss always tells me, I'm stood on the Titanic and I'm attempting to get it to shift. Now, the only way I can get it to shift is that all clients come on board. We share our data to ensure that all of our workers, all of the human beings on all of our sites are safer.
Right, thanks. Nigel, would you like to add to that?
Absolutely, Jenny. And I believe, as you say, CDM is out there, and if we work to it, we wouldn't be talking about it now. But I think as a client, we've got a responsibility to really handhold our supply chain to make sure that they are digitally competent, to be able to deliver in a smarter way, and really help them and assist so that they're meeting the needs that we've got in CDM. It's not just all about us as a client throwing a contract down and saying, this is what we want you to do. I believe, we've got a real responsibility to pull the wider supply chain into our way of thinking, and it's something that I really enjoy doing with our supply chain.
I'll be fascinated to hear, how it develops over both short term and the mid term, really, and use that as best practice and good examples to cascade out to the rest of the industry. So it is with that, and Matteo, you've been waiting very patiently to come back to answer that last point, but I think it all ties in very nicely from what we've just been talking about. And the question that you'll have seen is, it's fascinating that 90% of clients are not asking for inclusion, yet when it is at the forefront of major infrastructure clients and government. So I think that is bang on topic question. So I wonder, from your experience, how would you respond to that?
Well, that's a great observation. Thanks for whoever pointed it out. Well, I have to be a bit more precise with this observation. Around 10% of clients that inquire about an inclusive design project targeting, going beyond accessibility is different than saying, clients asking about checking the boxes for accessibility, for clients about asking for meeting the requirements from certain standards. So this means that there is still a lot to do in terms of raising this bar and raising the awareness about what actually accessibility means, but what inclusive design. And inclusive design means designing an environment according to physical, sensory, cognitive needs. Means. So there is this nuance that I think it's important to understand. Accessibility is a part of the big family, the big umbrella term of inclusive design. This is, I think, is important.
Right, excellent. Thank you very, very much, Matteo. There was only one more, well, it wasn't a question, it was just a comment from a colleague of mine, promising in the sense that from University College London, as a client, obviously, their transformation programme is picking up more and more on better collaboration between the design phases, construction through to operations, feeding into the operations and maintenance and construction. So it is working out there in small pockets, but I think the task and the challenge now is to make sure that we can do that right the way across the whole of the supply chain. And hopefully with those really interesting, fascinating presentations from Matteo, Jenny and Nigel, I think hopefully any attendees can take that information away, do some further research, and we'll see more on inclusive design in the not too distant future. So with that, the time has got to 10:53. I think what we're going to do now is go for a break, and we'll be back at 11 o'clock with Emma Stewart from Timewise. So I don't know whether anybody else needs to come in at that point, either Alistair or Bryony. If not,
I will come in to say, just to say, no, we don't need anyone else to come in. Have a great break, and we will be back at 11 o'clock.